What is good, my ex-homies? It is your boy Jacob Gooden, and we are back for another week of the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. This week, we're finishing up our series on this book right here, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, by the wonderfully uninformed Joshua Harris. And if you missed the last couple parts on this, go back and give those a listen, because they are a terribly good time. But this week we're touching on the last section in the book, which is called Now What? It's going to be like marriage, commitment, right? We're finally there. We're walking down the aisle. We're saying I do. We're putting the rings on, that kind of a thing. So that's what we're touching on this week. Without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to kick things off in chapter 12, titled Redeeming the Time. The main focus of this chapter is making the most of our singleness. And it kicks off, like many of the chapters in this book, with a story. And Josh is talking about coming home, finding his mom going through the mail, and opening up a wedding invitation for a girl he grew up with. And she hands it to him, and Josh's response is something like this. He says, "I can't believe this. Jenny is getting married. This is impossible." His mom responds by saying, "What do you mean it's impossible?" And he goes, "I liked her in the 8th grade. How can she be getting married?" She responds, "She met a nice guy, and they're getting married. It happens all of the time, right? Completely normal." And he winds back to her. He says, "Why is this happening to all of the girls I used to like?" And his mom goes on to say, "You haven't even talked to or thought about Jenny for years. So let's not be wistful all of a sudden." And he finishes by saying, "I'm not." And he looks down at the invitation, and he looks back at his mom, and he goes, "Mom, I think my biological clock is ticking." A few things I'm going to quickly say about this intro story. Josh, quit complaining, first and foremost. Quit complaining that people went off, they did the thing that you're not allowing yourself to do, right? They went off and they found a partner. They've been dating, they've been exploring, and now they're finally at the commitment point, okay? Also, like, super weird that you feel this kind of, like, ownership over somebody just because you liked them in the past, or maybe you dated them in the past. Just feels a little bit, like, strange. We're talking about girls that you liked 6 years ago, 4 years ago, something like that, and you weren't even dating them. So, like, what gives you the right to kind of feel that way? He immediately then goes in on this chapter into a story about turning 21. And I guess it's tradition at the Harris household when it's your birthday, that everyone in the family writes you a note. This year, he notices a theme in those notes. His mom says something along the lines of, "I know it will be hard to let you go when you meet the one you're waiting, that we're all waiting and praying for." His little brother, who's like 11 at the time, says something like, "I really treasure sharing a room with you, knowing that someday soon you'll be sharing a room with someone else." And his dad wraps it all up by saying, "Expect to meet her someday soon, if you haven't met her already. When you know you found her, be patient. You needn't rush. But neither should you feel the need to delay things. Marry her within the year and count on God to help take care of her." I wrote in my notes after this, I said, "What's with all the pressure?" That being said, I kind of experienced something similar right around when I turned 21. So let me set the stage for you a little bit. Right around when I turned 21, my birthday's in August, but the May before my birthday, I had just graduated college. I had also just had surgery on my lower back and was recovering from that. And one of the most loved people in my life, my grandma, was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. And so just a lot of things going on in life, right? A lot of emotions. And so that summer was really spent mostly with her. A lot of my family was at my grandparents' for a majority of that summer. It was emotional, right? It was hard. It's hard to watch this person that you love so deeply, dying. And anyway, but during that summer, one of my family members who, like I said, it's an emotional time. It's a little distressed, and comes to me and is like, "Hey, I think you should marry your girlfriend by your grandma's bedside." And when she'd probably just love being able to see her oldest grandson, get to that point in his life, right? Marriage. And I'm so thankful for my mom who immediately like heard this and then came to me and was like, "Do not do this, and do not like feel pressure uh, to do that because like you got a lot going on. Don't be rash about this decision." And even talking to my grandma. So even though she couldn't really talk, because if you don't know Lou Gehrig's disease, it affects your motor skills. It affects how your body operates, and basically it shuts things down. So you start to not be able to like have as much control over your hands, and for her she couldn't talk anymore, and then eventually it shuts down your organs on the inside. And so anyway, but one of the things that she could do was on her iPad she had a program and she could push these buttons and make sentences, and she punched in there and basically was like, "I love you and I love your girlfriend, but like it's not time." And so her and I had a whole conversation about that, and it wasn't time. I wasn't even 21. I was 20 at the time, like just about to be 21. So I'm really thankful. You know, the story does end with me marrying that girl at 22, and my grandma wasn't there to see it, but that's okay. It wasn't the right timing. So I totally understand that pressure. I think I had a lot of friends in college, kind of a similar deal. At very young, there was this pressure to like get married and figure out life and do all those things. And you know, to each their own. We all work on our own time schedules. We're going to jump a little forward in this chapter and talk about a section that Josh calls the practice now section. And he lays out a couple things that you should be practicing, right, as you're preparing for marriage. So those things include practicing intimacy, practicing seeking God with others, practicing financial literacy, and practicing parenthood. Oh, and lastly, practicing practical life skills. Now, I'm only going to touch on a few of these, but we're going to talk about practicing intimacy. Now, if you remember back a few chapters ago, and maybe it was part 3, it might have been part 2, I don't quite remember, but Josh already did talk about intimacy in this book, and in it he kind of outlines that intimacy is this thing that is between two romantic partners, right? And he kind of equates it to sex a little bit, but it's like this closeness thing. And earlier in that chapter, he says friendship is about something other than the two people in a relationship, where, as opposed to, intimacy is about each other. In a true friendship, something outside of the two friends brings them together. The key to friendship is a common goal or object of which both companions focus. It can be an athletic pursuit, a hobby, faith, music, but it's something outside of them. As soon as two people involved focus on their relationship, it has moved beyond friendship. And what I wrote after this, I said, maybe I'm missing what he's trying to say here, but I think that you can have friendship that isn't always focused on something outside of like the relationship. Okay. Right. If we look back at like an actual dictionary definition of intimacy, we see that it's close familiarity or friendship. It's a closeness with somebody, right? And so we share intimacy with a bunch of different people in our lives, right? From our loved ones, our family members, our friends, all these different people in our life, mentors, and it looks different, right? There's different levels of intimacy and closeness that we build with each of those people. And so it's really funny because in that earlier chapter, Josh is like super anti-intimacy amongst anybody that's not your romantic partner. But all of a sudden, now we're talking about it. And he goes on in this current chapter, chapter 12 of the book, and he says, while we want to avoid premature intimacy in romantic relationships, we should practice intimacy in other committed relationships, starting with our families. He goes on and he shares the story of a young girl he knows who he's friends with, and he says that she struggles to like communicate with her parents, okay? And so after dinner, she just goes up to her room, or she doesn't tell them about the things that are going on in her life. And so he says this, whenever they tried to talk to her, she would clam up and refuse to share her feelings. So to reverse this trend, my friend now works hard to build intimacy and openness with her folks. Instead of retreating to her room after dinner, she hangs out and talks with them. Instead of shutting them out of her life, she invites them in. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm going to sit here and be like, that's bad and she shouldn't do that. Like, closeness with your family is very important, and it's something I value. It's something I have, and your family tends to be the people who know you the best, especially when you're younger, right? Because most of the time we live with them for 18 plus years, and but what I think is missing here is like the context of why does she feel this need to like be closed off with them or not share her personal life with them. So I think there's a piece missing there that like intimacy is something that is to be earned, right? It's trust, it's that closeness, it is an earned thing. And so why doesn't she feel worthy to give it? I also think that this section kind of goes to illustrate some of like the half-baked ideas or like the conflicting ideas of this book, right? Because like I said earlier in this book, back in chapters like 5, 6, 7, something like that, Josh talked about intimacy only being between romantic partners. Now all of a sudden we have intimacy with close family members. Let's jump ahead just a little bit more, and we're going to talk about practicing parenthood. Now, again, on the surface, a lot of these things that he talks about practicing, I'm not against them. Okay, yeah, as we get older, we need these things in our life, right? We have to practice. If you want to be a parent someday, it's probably a good idea that you spend some time around kids. If you, I don't think it's a terrible idea to practice some financial literacy and then also just like practical life skills. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's important that we have some things in our life that we work on, right? And we get better at. But here's why I struggle with this one. Josh tells the story of Jeannie and how she was the youngest sibling in her family. So she didn't grow up with younger siblings to look after, to care for, and so she didn't have a lot of time around babies and toddlers, okay? And so she volunteers with a family from church who has 7 kids, and she goes over once a week, and she takes care of the kids, and she cooks, and she cleans, and she does household stuff, right? She's learning the way of the house. There's 2 things here that I just question, okay? One, why is she doing it for free? Now, if you want to volunteer your time that way, I don't have an issue with that. You'll understand why the free thing in a moment. The other thing that I wonder about this scenario is that it's painted as a girl doing these things, which stereotypically inside of the church, women stay home, they do all the cooking and the cleaning, they raise the kids, that kind of a thing. I wonder what he would have to say about a guy doing this. Maybe he's on board, maybe he's not. I don't really know. It's not painted that way, so again, just a question I had. Now, why this kind of stuck out to me the way it did is that in the homeschool community, a lot of the families are larger, right? My family is a little bit of an anomaly, 2 kids. I had friends who 12 kids, 6 kids, 7 kids. It was not a normal, unusual for like parents to be outnumbered. And so I have a friend who she basically ended up raising her younger brother. And it was frustrating because she's my age and she was my friend, right? And when we were in high school, we wanted to do friend stuff. We wanted to go to the movies and we wanted to hang out. We wanted to invite her to a pool party. We wanted to whatever. And she never had time to hang out with us because she was always taking care of her younger brother and essentially being mom. And that was frustrating. She also, as far as I know, wasn't like paid or compensated for it. And again, that's my own, why would you do this for free? I babysat, I did things sometimes for free, but usually for a little bit of money. But what we found so annoying about that scenario was, like I said, she wasn't ever free to be a kid. She was kind of forced into this momhood thing really early, and it, I would argue, robbed her of her childhood. And so, anyway, I hope that now she's gotten an opportunity to like kind of maybe regain some of that. I don't know. I'll have to ask her. But the other thing I wanted to say was that I know I come from a little bit of a privileged place when it comes to I only have one other sibling, and so my parents were able to spend a lot of time with me, and we didn't outnumber them. I also know from firsthand experience, because my family tried to adopt 2 kids, And while they were with us, I saw the shift in how my parents' attention went from being solely on my sister and I to all of a sudden also needing to give attention to two more kids, and most of the time actually give them the majority of the attention. And that hurt our relationship, right? It was like a good bad thing. It was a big learning experience for all of us. But I definitely saw the dynamic shift, and it became pretty evident pretty quickly that if those kids had stayed with us, um, I wasn't going to get the time with my parents. Now, like I said before, I'm not against practicing stuff. I also grew up volunteering. I did childcare for people. I babysat with my sister. We would tag team some of those larger homeschool families, right, where we were severely outnumbered. I also worked. I did junior high ministry. I did children's church. Heck, a couple years ago, I even worked at a toy store and ran birthday parties for 8-year-olds. There's something to be said if you're interested in being a parent or you enjoy being around kids. Yeah, there's practice that has to take place for that kind of stuff. In the same way that we practice financial literacy and other life skills like cooking and cleaning and all those other things, right? Like there's a level to that, and when you are gearing up for marriage, some of those things can probably be good to practice. Moving right along into chapter 13. This one's called Ready for the Sack, but Not for the Sacrifice: How to Have a Biblical and Realistic Vision of Marriage. So I'm going to lay out a bunch of what's in this chapter before I get into my thoughts on it, but here's kind of the gist of the first few pages of this chapter, okay? Josh kicks it off. He tells a story of his wedding videography photography business. And he talks about shooting a wedding the day of, right? And capturing all the wonderful moments of the bride and groom getting ready and walking down the aisle and the first looks and the exchanging of the vows and the rings. He talks about the party afterwards and highlighting the dancing and the festivities and the smiles, right? And the hugs and the love, right? And then he talks about the editing process, right? After the event. And, he's like, you do a little trimming here. Maybe you cut somebody who made a funny face out of this photo and you Photoshop in a photo of them smiling. Maybe you cut part of the video where in the background you can see two ants fighting over who ordered the chicken and who ordered the beef for dinner and things like that, right? You fix a tie knot that was twisted kind of funny on one of the groomsmen, all this kind of stuff. And he goes on and says, unfortunately, many young people have a view of marriage as limited and unreal as the wedding videos that I create. These people think of married life as one grand, thrilling moment after another, and that the everyday mundane parts of marriage are safely edited from the picture. He then goes on and talks about young people's perspectives on marriage, and he talks about young girls, and he says that, they obsess over bride magazines, and maybe they don't fully understand the reality that marriage is a lot more than just the day of the wedding. But the thing that I want to highlight a little bit more is that he also talks about guys reducing marriage down to a single aspect, that being sex. And he says this: I'm ashamed to admit that I struggle with the tendency to equate marriage with sex. When I picture being married, I almost immediately picture going to bed with my wife, as if that's all that married people do. The book then goes on to a section called Duly Considered. And Josh is going to share part of a sermon that says, marriage is not to be the enterprise lightly or wantonly to satisfy man's carnal lusts and appetites, but reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God, duly considering the cause for which matrimony was ordained. He then goes on, because it's a bunch of big churchy heavy words, right? Seems like an old-timey sermon, to say the least. But he goes on and he's going to break down those terms. So, reverence, a profound respect mingled with awe. Discretion, discernment, or good judgment. Advisedly, with careful consideration. And sober, to be well-balanced, unaffected by passion, excitement, or prejudice. Now, if you're like me and purity culture made up a big chunk of the puberty years of your life, you know that like sexual sin was this like super ambiguous term thrown around a lot. I've talked about it in previous episodes, not only about this book, but just like in general previous episodes. But I was taught this very specific thing that was sex outside of marriage is bad. Sex inside of marriage is good. Sexual feelings I had were bad because those feelings should only be had for the person you're married to. Masturbation was bad because it led to sexual fantasies and sexual feelings towards people, and that was bad. Basically, anything and everything sexual in nature was bad until it was within the context of marriage. Here's my problem with that thinking. The human body gets horny, right? It's going to have an emotional, a chemical, a physical response to stuff. And when you think about all that stuff as being bad, it results in a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. But these reactions don't just stop because we say they're bad. The human body gets horny. So how do we fix it? Well, we get married. And so I'm not really all that surprised that young people equate marriage with sex, because for many of us, that's the message that we hear over and over and over again. Sex is awesome, and the only way to have it is in marriage. So then we can't be surprised when people rush into marriage because, well, they need sexual fulfillment, right? And once they get in, the rose-colored glasses pop off, right? The hormone goggles disappear, and you start to question. You start to ask questions. What have I gotten myself into? Maybe their partner is actually awful, right? But because we had, those goggles on, I ignored red flags along the way. Maybe we're not a good fit, And I find this, I'm going to say funny, but I honestly find it, I think, more sad because I watched this happen time and time again with people I grew up with people I went to college with, because I went to a small Christian college, and I watched these people get married super young, probably for the reason of, I'm horny, I want sex, the only way to get sex is to get married. I know that I'm probably coming off as somebody who's like pro premarital sex, and I just think it's a choice. Have it, don't have it. I don't really care. That's up to you. That's up to your decision of what you want to do with your life. What I care more about, and what I'm talking more about, is the fact that I think people should have a healthy view of what sex is, right? I'm pro sex ed, if you will. I don't feel like I was 100% afforded that, and I would have valued a legitimate sex talk, right? The Christian environment that I grew up in villainized sex to the point where I today wouldn't be surprised if Christian couples are not having sex because of the guilt and the shame, because I know that feeling, right? It's this habit that got built up inside of us that sex is bad, and this understanding of what sex is and how sex is bad. And that doesn't just flip a switch overnight, right? It doesn't just turn to sex is good just because I'm married now. Our brains don't operate that way. It's like a bad habit. You learn a bad habit, and it takes a lot of unlearning to get you out of that bad habit. Another thing I wanted to highlight about this book, or at least just remind you of, is the fact that this is written by a 21-year-old guy, okay? And it came out when he was 21. He probably started writing it in 1920, I would assume. And while he did go on soon after this to get married, it was still a few years. And then he released his marriage book. But I just find it so interesting that we put this single guy as the expert on what godly relationships leading to marriage should look like. Somebody who has not experienced that. So I just want to remind you of that. Let's get into chapter 14. It's called What Matters at 50, the character qualities and attitudes that matter most in a life partner. Josh starts off by saying this. He goes, as I ponder the foreverness of marriage, one question keeps rattling through my mind. What qualities should I look for in a wife? When I think of that question, I know the answer entails many deep internal characteristics, but in everyday life, I still find it difficult to get past the superficial. A cute girl walks in the room and all my common sense evaporates. How many times have I made a complete fool of myself by falling head over heels for someone simply because of their charm and beauty? Too many times. As we move along in the chapter, we get into a section called Glimpses of True Character, and Josh has us look at 3 areas of a person's life. And those are how a person relates to God, how a person relates to others, and a person's personal discipline. Say that 3 times fast. So let's just go down the list, starting with how a person relates to God. The book says this: look for and work on becoming a man or woman who, as a single, seeks God wholeheartedly, putting him before anything else. Don't worry about impressing the opposite sex. Instead, strive to please and glorify God. And along the way, you'll catch the attention of people with the same priorities. You know what's funny about this whole don't be worried about what others do, but also this little caveat at the end of like, but don't worry, you'll get the attention of the right people uh, as you do this, right? As you strive to make your whole life about God. I find it really funny because I worked in churches. I know a lot of people who went to churches, and specifically with the guys, I know that we sometimes would put on the good Christian guy outfit of like, say this, do that, act this way during worship, take communion at this time, do these little things, quote this scripture, all these different things. And it was like very performative because it was just kind of that like, we knew that would be attractive to the girls. The other thing that I find kind of weird about this is this idea, and I think we all know people like this who make their whole identity like this obsession of like God, or it seems obsessive about like God, and they only ever want to talk about God, and they only want to talk about church and the Bible and Christianity and all these different things. And then you start to like dive into who they are as people and ask them about hobbies, and they have nothing else. And I find that really weird because I talked about this on, I think, the last episode, the importance of like having something else, right, that's interesting about who you are as a person besides just, I'm a Christian. Do you like music? Do you like movies? Do you have a special hobby, a special gift, a special whatever that you enjoy and can talk about for hours and hours and hours, right? We as humans, that's just like something that we find attractive in other people is their interests. Let's take a look at how a person relates to others, okay? Josh talks about looking at 4 different categories, if you will, of people in someone's life and how they interact with them to evaluate your future partner, okay? Those 4 categories are authorities, parents, the opposite sex, and companions. Now, I'm only going to look at one, okay? I'm going to look at authorities. And he says this in the book. He says, a guy who can't follow legitimate orders will have difficulty holding a job or receiving pastoral correction when needed. A girl who can't respect a teacher or a coach's authority will have difficulty honoring her husband. Right off the rip, you probably know where I'm about to go with this. I find it so interesting that when it comes to a woman being able to submit to authority, Josh talks about her being able to submit to a husband. However, when he talks about a man being able to submit to authority, there's no mention about him being able to submit to his wife. So conveniently, inside of Christianity, we take the Bible verse that's, a woman is supposed to submit to her husband, and we leave conveniently out the second part of that verse, which is, and man is also supposed to submit to his wife. I wrote in my notes, I said, she's also deserving of respect because when you're in a relationship, it's a partnership. It's not a dictatorship. Her voice has power, and it matters, okay? Neither partner can control everything. It just isn't going to end well. And I don't just mean she's in charge of the house, like cleaning, cooking, all that type of stuff. What I do mean is you learn to play to each other's strengths, okay? That to me is a very important part of your life. I enjoy cooking more than Maddie does, so I do a lot of cooking. I just enjoy it. That's a part of who I am as a person. Maddie's better at doing other things that I'm not as skilled at, or I just don't want to do, or whatever. We play to that. That is a part of us figuring out in our relationship the things that work the best together. It's a partnership. We have to communicate and talk and figure it out together. The last thing as we work our way through character qualities is personal discipline. And Josh says this, we are examining whether a good potential spouse fosters habits that are disobedient to God or revealing of a deeper disregard for others. He lays out then a couple of areas to look at, including things like how a person spends their time, how they handle money, and how they take care of their body. I'm just going to focus on the body because in there is the clothing, is the modesty piece of it. And he says this, geared towards women, he says, a girl who dresses immodestly may catch a guy's attention, But what does her clothing say about her heart? And I put in my notes, I'm like, I'm so tired of the modesty thing. Okay. I'm so tired of it. Of course, he doesn't spell out what modesty is, he leaves it up for interpretation. And as we just discussed, when we were looking at a godly woman, she is one that will submit to authority. So when her pastor says girls wearing spaghetti strap tank tops is sinful, and you really should only be leaving the house wearing a long sleeve top, it's reinforcing this idea that men cannot control their thoughts or their actions towards women, and that it's a woman's responsibility to keep men pure. It's also reinforcing this thought that women can't think for themselves. Now, Josh doesn't leave the dudes out on this one because he has this to say about men and their clothes. He says, a guy who spends his money on the latest style may have the appearance of togetherness, but his infatuation with fashion could mean he's too preoccupied with what people think of him, and that he may make poor decisions with his money. Now, this one hit home for me because while I maybe don't as much anymore, I used to be really into fashion, and I took a lot of risks. Some of you who've known me for a long time know some of those risks. Not going to show pictures. Go search them up. Remember for yourselves. But for me, fashion and clothes was very much like a hobby. I was interested in it because for a couple of reasons. One, I like the history of it. I like understanding what kind of made timeless fashion as opposed to something that was trendy. But also, I've always kind of been of the mindset that when you look good on the outside, you feel good on the inside. So, Josh, your argument, I think, is just kind of dumb, just being honest. There's one last thing I want to touch on in this chapter, and that is knowing if they're the one. Josh tells a story at the very end about a guy who emails him and wrote this in the email. He said, how could I possibly get to know a person well enough before marriage to know if they're right? It seems like getting married is like jumping off a cliff. This struck a chord with me because when I was a teenager, there was a very big push in my circles of friends, in the church I went to, of this like knowing God's will for your life. And a lot of my friends took it to this extreme of like having to be so certain of the things that they're going to do with their life. So where they're going to go to college and what they're going to study as a career and the person they're going to date and all these different things. And they had this, like, they needed to know the answer before like living life, right? I think that ruins a piece of like what life is about, which is making mistakes and learning lessons, right? I've got one more thing in my notes that I want to share on this, and that's that I think that the purity culture movement was so set on having kids and young adults get it right on the first try that they missed the point of life, which is living. The constant bombardment of doing the right thing, keeping ourselves holy, resisting sin, forced us to forget that our sins were paid, right? Our debt was paid. If you believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay for our sins, like, we were forgetting that, I think, because we were so worried that by doing something that was against the will of God, we would be entering into sin, and that was bad. When the reality is, we make choices in life, and there's consequences to those actions. They're good or they're bad consequences, right? For every action, there's a reaction. Chapter 15 is called Principled Romance, and this is Josh laying out his new structure, right? The new principles that will guide you from friendship to matrimony, okay? And he says this is a new pattern for relationships that can help us avoid the problems that are often encountered in traditional dating. So what is the pattern? We go from casual friends to deeper friendship, from deeper friendship to purposeful intimacy with integrity, and from purposeful intimacy to engagement. Notice how there's no dating, because at this point, we've kissed dating goodbye. So right into it. We don't even talk about casual friendships in this chapter. He drives straight into deeper friendships. And he says this. He uses this kind of like story of his little sister. And he says, one spring day, my 4-year-old sister was so excited to see the first flowers pushing up out of the soil that she plucked a handful of the unopened buds and proudly gave them to our mom. My mom was so disappointed by my sister's impatience that she said, "You picked them too soon. They're a lot prettier when they've been allowed to bloom." He goes on to say, We're often guilty of the same impatience in our relationship. Instead of waiting until friendship fully blooms, we rush into romance. Our impatience not only costs us the beauty of friendship as singles, it can also place our future marriages on shaky ground. Strong marriages are built on a solid foundation of the mutual respect, appreciation, and camaraderie of friendship. Controversial take here, but I kind of don't disagree that strong marriages are built on friendship. My marriage is built on friendship. A lot of people I know who have very strong relationships is built on friendship. So I don't disagree on that. How we get there is where we're going to disagree. So when it comes to relationships, Josh is so concerned that we rush into romance and that it obscures a person's ability to see someone for who they truly are, right? Our hormones and our infatuation, they overwhelm, and we see things more in like a honeymoon kind of a way. And this is what he's been saying for the majority of the book. We leave out the romance, we leave out the physicality, we leave out the hormones and the infatuation and all of that stuff. We leave all that out. We build friendship that gets us ultimately to marriage. Now, here's where we disagree a little bit. I think that the romance aspect can work in tandem with the building of the friendship aspect, okay? They can both be there. The fun date nights, the buying the gifts, the cutesy texts, the love notes, all the stuff that he says has to wait until you're married. All of that can be happening, and you can still show an interest in getting to know who that person is. What are the things that light them up, right? What are the things that they value? It doesn't have to be separated. As we move on in the chapter, Josh gives us the green lights, right, that mean we can start to pursue marriage, okay? And those green lights include, are we seeking God's word? And is our partner seeking God's word? Are we marriage ready? Do we have the approval and support from the community, right? Our families, our loved ones. And do we feel the peace of God? As he goes through these, he lists out some of the things that would make instant no's, right? If a person isn't a Christian, not the one. If you aren't spiritually mature, emotionally mature, or financially mature, not ready. If your family doesn't approve, don't get married. If your stomach don't sit right, you're not ready. So I do agree that there's a level of, I think, maturity that people should be at. They should have some common ground on their values. Personally, for me, my family's input is important to me and was important to me when I was getting married. So while I agree with some of these things, I think the black and white nature of what he's doing is where it's a little bit dangerous, okay? If it's not this, then no. If it's not that, then no. Maturity can mean a lot of things, right? I got married when I was 22, and I felt like at the time I was ready to get married. Looking back, maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. I'll never know if I wasn't because, well, I don't get to go back in time and not do it. But I've grown up a lot since then, okay? 7 years since then. A lot's changed. I've changed a lot as a person. Maddie's changed a lot as a person. We evolved, right? The other thing I wanted to say is that at the end of the day, your relationship is your relationship. Sure, it's great to have the approval and the support of loved ones, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you know what's best for you. Nobody else gets to make that decision for you. Sprinkled throughout this chapter is kind of a bunch about parental involvement and participation and approval and all those kind of things. So I'm lumping them all together in this section. And he says this at one point in the book, talking about somebody who is kind of gearing up to basically pursue somebody. He says, but before he went into action, he chose to give proper honor to Shelley's parents. First, by asking their permission to grow closer to their daughter and for the purpose of pursuing marriage. So I knew this girl in college who she wouldn't date a guy until they had called her dad and gotten permission. And I will never forget the look on her face when I said, if I ever ask you out, I'm not getting on the phone with your dad to ask his permission. That's like a waste of my time. It's a waste of his time. If you don't trust yourself to make that decision, then you're probably not somebody I want to date anyways. And the look of shock on her face was absolutely crazy. I just believed, and I still do, that like when it comes to dating, we need to enable people to have agency over their body and feel like they can make decisions for themselves. Okay. And, a side note to this is then it kind of leads to also that, like, well, do you ask for a parent's permission for marriage? And that's a little bit more of a traditional thing. I'm not going to lie. I did ask permission. My mother-in-law was like, are you crazy? Of course you have permission. Like, you didn't even need to ask. I do understand that one a little bit more. I don't view it so much as a permission ask as I do just a letting them know, giving them the intention of, like, this is something I'm going to do. I would like your blessing to pursue that. But, I'm personally somebody who, even if they said no, maybe it would have given me some pause to think about it. But I knew pretty well in my heart that's what I wanted to do. He goes on to talk about how now that we've asked permission to pursue or to get closer, and with the idea of pursuing for marriage, he says, at this point, invite the girl's parents to ask pointed questions. What kind of plan do you have to support our daughter? What kind of activities will you pursue as you attempt to win her hand in marriage? And he goes on to talk about, like, this testing, right? And it's very, like, stereotypical, like, dad being against the boyfriend, like, how are you gonna, provide for my daughter, and what are you gonna do for her, and you're never gonna be good enough, and, like, all this kind of stuff. And it's just really weird. It plays again into that stereotype that all the boys want out of a girl is sex. They could never want just, like, an actual healthy relationship from them. But I also wondered this. I wondered, how does this make girls feel? Like, do you feel like you have choice over your body? Do you feel like you have choice over who you can date? Do you feel trusted by your parents to actually make good decisions? Do you not? Like, it's very weird behavior. The other thing, as it goes on, he talks about being put on trial, right? And being grilled and prodded like a wild animal. And he says this about, like, how he thinks parents will react to this. He says, unfortunately, I think many parents won't really care. They may think you're being melodramatic or taking things too seriously. And I said this, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. You're being over the top, right? You're putting this heavy emphasis on having all these questions answered, these big life questions. As you get to know people, right, when you're dating somebody and you get to know their family and you get to know the people that surround them and their loved ones, naturally they're going to ask you questions that are about your job and what you do and what you value as a human, because you're becoming friends with them. You're building an intimate relationship also with those people, where there's a closeness and a comfortability with those people. So those things are naturally going to come up. But by forcing them to be at such an early stage sometimes, right, where it's like, you don't even know if you like this person yet a lot of times, right? You're just taking it, you have an interest, so you're taking it a step above, but you're like, now you're just demanding that their family grill you and quiz you and ask you all these questions as if it's like, I have to get an A+ on my test so that I get approval to, move on to the next letter grade. It's like, no, it's not like that. It's not a test of, like, will you pass or not? It's it's a discovering time. It's a learning time together. All of this asking for parents' permission and the involvement of family leads into his next point, which is about bringing romance home. And he says this about it. He says, one of the most unfortunate aspects of contemporary dating is the way that it has removed the process of romance from the warmth and reality of the home. Find creative ways in your own relationship to keep focus on learning, testing, and growth, not just reveling in romantic love. There's a little bit of yada yada in the middle of that. But what I think is so weird about this is, like, I knew too many kids that they ended up in courtship situations. Their parents were heavily involved. They went on every date with them, or a sibling went on a date with them, and there was, like, this very, like, hand-holdy, like, we don't trust you kind of a thing. And, oh, man, I just, like, cannot imagine having dated in a scenario like that. I think it would have just been god-awful, and I probably would have, like, sworn off dating forever, because ultimately, at the end of the day, when you partner up with somebody and you decide to live with them, to get serious with them, to marry them, whatever it may be, you're living with that person. You're not, yes, there's a degree to which you have to live with the in laws and you have to live with the siblings and all those types of things. But at the end of the day, there's you and one other person in that relationship. And it's like, it's overwhelming when you start to get all of these other people involved. Uh, and it just becomes like I'm dating six people instead of I'm just dating one person. As we get near to the end of this chapter, he has a section that I have titled, Let's Get Physical, dot, 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 or not. And he says, I've committed to waiting even for a kiss until I'm married. I want my first kiss with my wife to be on our wedding day. I know that sounds archaic to many, and truthfully, I would have scoffed at the idea myself 4 years ago. But I've come to realize how sinful and meaningless physical intimacy can be apart from the commitment and purity of marriage. What did he just say? That physical intimacy outside of marriage is sinful and meaningless. It corrupts the purity of marriage. And I was really heated when I wrote this and I said, fuck off. Again, with this narrative of anything sexual, anything deemed as sexual sin, bad, 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 bad. Vows happen, marriage happens, we commit, everything sexual, good, 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 good. The human mind doesn't work this way. It doesn't ping pong back and forth. It requires work, dedication, and unlearning to break the habit. The values of purity culture are building bad habits when it comes to physical romantic relationships and sex. I had to pull out the book for this last part because I have so many highlighted things on this last page. I think it's the worst advice in the entire book. And it says this: where physical progression begins, depth progression ends. In other words, as soon as we begin to focus on the physical side of our relationship, the spiritual and emotional side ceases to deepen. Make a commitment to God, parents, Christian mentors, friends, and your partner to let your passion sleep, storing up your desire for the marriage bed. It will awaken with joy at the proper time. My reaction to this was this. This is pure laziness. It's not a you can have one or the other, but not both. Like, you can have both. It just takes work and dedication and effort. Okay? As we go down the page, he hits on privacy. Part of keeping this kind of commitment involves avoiding settings given to temptation. This doesn't mean you can never have privacy, but two people can have privacy and time alone without completely isolating themselves from parents and friends. When you do have activities that involve just the two of you, make sure you carefully plan your time, avoid a sensual focus and atmosphere, and let someone know where you'll be and when you'll be home. I wrote down, what do you mean privacy while being around other people? The definition of privacy is the state or condition of being free from being observed or disturbed by other people. Like, you literally that can't happen when you've got people around. And this solution of being accountable to only being out a certain period of time, having people know exactly where you are, it refuses to allow people to have agency over themselves. We're not trusted to make smart decisions. And that's ultimately what a lot of this book boils down to. You can't trust yourself, and so you need to trust others to make decisions for you. As we move down the page, he says this: remember, by delaying sexual involvement, you're storing up passion and making sexual love within your marriage that much more meaningful. Don't allow impatience now to rob you of an undefiled, passionate sexual relationship in marriage. Josh claims that by delaying sexual involvement, you're storing up passion and making sexual love within your marriage that much more meaningful. So sex outside of marriage is meaningless, huh? It has no value? I know what he's getting at. It makes us less of a person because we're giving ourselves away. I now choose to view it as a learning experience. There's plenty of me to go around. It doesn't make me less of a person because I chose to give of myself. Again, make your own decision of whether you want to have sex before marriage or not. I don't really care. But this messaging that save yourself, save yourself, save yourself, save yourself, because as soon as you have sex, you've given that piece of yourself away and you never can get that back. It's this very dangerous narrative that there's like only so much of you to go around, that there's only so much, that your value is wrapped up in your sex life, that your value is wrapped up in how many bodies you've been with, that your value is wrapped up in da 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 da. It's just bullshit, and it leads to this really screwed up way of thinking about how you view your body, sex, and relationships. The last thing that he says in this chapter is, the new pattern we've discussed is only an outline. As with anything, a couple can manipulate it to fulfill only the minimal requirements. But I believe such manipulation will rob a couple of experiencing God's best. My response was this: bro, what do you know? You're 20, not married. You're a stupid idiot that hasn't even kissed someone. But more importantly, these sentences highlight why, when I was 14 reading this, I didn't want to stray from it. Because if I did, I'd be robbing myself of God's best. What a crock of shit. I have really nothing to say about chapter 16, because chapter 16 I think is a complete waste of time. He basically goes on to tell his parents' love story, which equates to them seeing each other at a coffee shop, his dad asking his mom out. She says no. He says, maybe I'll call you sometime. She says, maybe. And then his dad hearing a voice, the voice of God, apparently, telling him not to call her. And that's literally where the book ends. We still have no clue how his parents got together. We really don't know their love story. It's meant to be this story of listening for the voice of God, right? And waiting until the timing is right and all of those things. But we don't even know how it got started, to be honest. So it's just, I don't even think it's worth talking about, to be honest. That's it. Whew. We made it. Made it through the book, finally. Thank you if you made it this far, first and foremost. Secondly, I hope you got something out of this. This has been a brutal experience for me. I know, based on a couple comments from you guys and messages that I've received, I know that reliving some of this has not been fun. It's not fun for me either. It's brought up things that I didn't even remember, that I had maybe blacked out of my life. But I think it's been good. I think it's been a little therapeutic. This is a topic that I'm going to continue to talk about. I'm going to continue to educate myself on. These are important topics, and I think it's something I'm passionate about. Hopefully that comes across. I want to continue to learn and educate and make myself a better human. And talking about it is one way that I do that, sharing my experience with people. So, that being said, I got really nothing else for you guys. Do me a favor, if you made it this far, do all of the internet things that you know how to do. Like, comment, subscribe, share it with a friend. If you don't feel like leaving a comment, that's cool. If you want to shoot me a DM, you totally can. EXHS Club on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, or you could shoot me an email at exhsclub@gmail.com. And I do my best to try to respond to you guys. But yeah, that's, I think, all I got for you until we meet again. Peace.